Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you a conversation with my recurring guest, Barbara Karnes, and we're talking about her new book, Always Offer, Never Forced: Food at End of Life. And we do a deeper dive into nourishment and nutrition at the end of life and how to cope with supporting a loved one who is at the end of life, but is no longer interested in eating. And so I hope you find this interview valuable. Also, that you'll get Barbara's new booklet from her website, bkbooks.com. So make sure you subscribe to this channel down below. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. And if you feel so inclined, go to eoluniversity.com/support and make a small contribution to help keep this channel and the podcast on the air. So we'll move on now with my conversation with Barbara Karnes. I'm so happy to welcome my special guest and friend, Barbara Karnes, who's a regular now on this podcast. And Barbara has just come out with a new book titled Always Offer, Never Force: Food at End of Life. So, Barbara, welcome back once again. It's really nice to talk with you.
Thank you. It's always great to have our talk sessions.
Yeah, we always have such a good time, and we were talking about how easy it is to talk to one another. Everything kind of flows between us. But I was excited when I saw this new book because I think it's such an important topic, and we have mentioned it in other episodes, when we've talked about what happens at the end of life, that people stop needing food. But for families, this is such a big concern. And I'm really glad you came out with a separate book about it and thought we should have a conversation about it.
Well, it's interesting. I make reference to eating and not eating in most of my materials. But once I was walking in a caregiver's shoes personally, as my husband was approaching death, food became our number one battle. And when he died and I'm processing everything, I thought I must write something for caregivers so that they can understand what's driving the discontent and the emotions that the caregiver is experiencing around food. The key, one day, my husband and I had this big to do over food. And he basically said, leave, get out of the room, want to get rid of me. My heart was breaking as I'm in the hall. And it occurred to me, I'm trying to keep him alive, and his body's trying to die. Barbara, always offer, just don't force. And that was the moment that that booklet was born, because I want caregivers to understand that how they can feed their loved one. And there is, in the months before death, there is a way to feed, to get the most nutrition in the smallest amount into your special person. But then as death gets closer, food becomes less and less of a part of living. It's the gas we put in our car to make it run. And if the body's preparing to die, it doesn't want the food. It reaches a point it can't eat the food. And so that's why I wrote the specific book, because it is so pertinent in end of life issues.
It is, and I would say it is one of the biggest concerns that caregivers and family members have about their loved one is knowing when to offer food, what food to offer, and also feeling alarmed when their loved one doesn't want to eat and refuses the food. And but it makes sense. It's like essential for life, and we know that. And as you mentioned, the emotions that are tied up in food and eating together. Food is love for us in so many ways. It it's one thing to talk clinically as hospice providers about, oh, why the body's shutting down and doesn't need food. It's far different though when you're the caregiver with someone you love and having to figure out whether to offer food or not.
Well, and I think you made a really good point in that we view food more than just the nutritional value it gives the body. We use food to socialize. We eat to cover up our emotions, or we don't eat to deal with our emotions. We use it as love, socialization. All of that is the stem, the bottom line of that is food. And so when our special person stops eating, we touch into all of the emotions that go with food as well.
And one thing that just occurred to me about why this is so important that your booklets coming out that people can get educated is if a family has the fortune of being able to care for a loved one and be present with them during the last few months of life. And they recognize, like, oh, one day mom or dad won't want to eat anymore. Therefore, let's think about food now while they're still able to eat and still enjoying food so that it won't hurt so much or feel like such a loss when that time comes. They can kind of prepare themselves in a way for the day when their loved one doesn't want to eat and can't eat any longer.
Well, from the point of diagnosis, my idea is to concentrate on high protein, high calorie foods. Um, and it's like an insurance policy. So from diagnosis, um, build up a fat reserve, a, an energy reserve, because the natural progression will be a person will eat less and less. And it starts with they stop eating meat, and then pretty soon it's fruits and vegetables, and then it's um, soft foods, ice cream, love our ice cream, but it's gradual. So if we concentrate on the quality kind of food that we get into our special person, um, it's an insurance policy. It's not going to really change the outcome, but it may give us a little more time. It may give us a little more quality. And I think that the key is for the caregiver to understand food as it relates to approaching death, because then it can eliminate, and I speak this from myself, it will eliminate the tension that builds as our special person doesn't eat.
That's so true. And we have to be able to follow the patient's cues in a way, I think, about when they are ready to stop eating, because it may not match up with our expectations or our hopes. Like we may have thought, oh, I'm going to make these special soups or this broth, or I'll do this, I'll have this ready for my loved one. And it might not match up with what their body is actually telling them.
Well, and that's why always offer. Make the favorite cake, make whatever, always offer, but then lovingly understand that if they don't eat it, it's not because they don't want to, they can't. And I think that's a big part of knowing it. They aren't being arbitrary. They aren't being difficult. They can't eat. It
And
isn't a choice.
yeah, and actually, because their organs are beginning to shut down, it would make them feel far worse if they did eat. And so it isn't just a preference to not eat, it's actually could be harmful to them physically if they tried to eat, and they might have trouble swallowing, they might aspirate the food. And if it did get into their stomachs, they might have terrible pain because they aren't equipped any longer to digest the food well.
Absolutely. There's just so many dynamics that are involved around food. Um, I wish that every caregiver who's dealing with serious illness could read Always Offer, Never Force, because it is such a key part of health, um, and of living. And we want to support our special person in living the best they can as long as they can. And that means we don't want to have a lot of conflict and a lot of unpleasantness, argumentativeness, just love and support.
And one thing I've seen caregivers experience is that sometimes visitors who come in from the outside don't understand that the patient can't eat and shouldn't eat right now, and ask questions like, why aren't you feeding him? Why didn't you, why, where's the food? Why aren't you getting him to eat? And so caregivers do face a lot of pressure, I think, from others around food, and probably feel guilt as well, or question themselves, am I really doing the right thing?
I think they're feeling judged by those around them. And that's why, knowledge is so important so that they can have the clarity of, yeah, this is what's happening, and here's how I'm approaching it and working with it. That so that the caregiver doesn't take on the sense of guilt that often we on the outside looking in don't really understand. And, we don't really know what goes on behind closed doors. And so we want to be real careful in what we say to the caregiver and support the caregiver rather than placing some judgments on the kind of care they're providing.
And the beauty of Always Offer, Never Force is that it is a booklet and it's short and easy to read, as are all of your booklets that you've written. So it's it's a short enough read, but the caregiver can read it, but could also give it to visitors if they have questions like, this is the information I'm following for care. You can read it too, so you'll understand it. And oftentimes, I think hospice nurses and home health aides just may not have enough time to sit down with the caregiver to fully explain why their loved one shouldn't eat. I mean, they may not be able to go into detail about it and really talk them through all of it. So for them to have the book available is really important. They can read it at any time when a question comes up.
Well, and in my mind, how I see it being used is Gone From My Sight is the booklet that explains to families the dying process. Here's what's happening. The 11th Hour companion booklet says, here's what you do while all of this is happening. And Always Offer, Never Force is the guide for how to feed and provide nourishment and comfort as all of this is happening. It's is another resource on an issue that is so paramount. And I think, as you pointed out, just having a nurse or home health aide, social worker, explain to us, the caregiver, what's going on doesn't help us at 3 o'clock in the morning when we're having problems. And that's why you leave behind short, easy to read, large print material.
Exactly. So really, it should be in the home of every family, um, caring for a loved one at home as just this accessible, easy resource for them when they have questions. At least I would like to see that. I did see one hospice who said, "Oh, we need to order these and give them out along with Gone from My Sight to make sure everyone has them."
Well, Grandma used to live at home, and I think we've said this before. Grandma lived at home. She died in the upstairs bedroom, and we knew what dying and death looked like because we were there. But as medicine and the medical establishment, the medical model has grown in our country, people go to the hospital, they go end up in nursing facilities. They are not, we are not there watching. We don't see the process. And so we need education and we need knowledge that used to be there because we were part of it. But because now most of the time we're not, then we need education because knowledge reduces fear, it brings comprehension, and people don't die like they do in the movies. Um, and we don't know that because we're not there witnessing. So we need guidance.
That's so true. And as you mentioned, um, one of the things that can happen when the medical system tries to take over in death and dying is artificial nutrition and hydration, like using tube feeding, um, and IV fluids or parenteral nutrition for patients, which in our minds, I'm sure is it's not helpful, can also cause harm because it's a failure to recognize this person's body is shutting down and is ready for death. And those measures are great for someone who will recover, who needs to be artificially nourished while their body is in the process of healing and recovering. But a person at the end of life, that's not the case.
It's not. And unfortunately, if you go the IV fluid or the artificial nutrition, um, you're really creating more complications than you do benefit. Because, as you said, the body's shutting down and nothing works. The kidneys aren't working, the lungs aren't working right, the stomach, nothing works right. And you start pouring in all that food, and the body can't handle it, and you end up with more complications and
And yeah, and more suffering. Yeah, more suffering for the patient. And then a lot more, it's just intervention, and it requires a lot more care from medical personnel and disruption in a way of those last days of life that we would hope could be peaceful at home.
exactly. Um, there comes a point when the body is dying that you don't need a doctor, you don't need a nurse, you need someone who understands the dying process and can support and guide the family and those presents through this experience. Um, Dying is a sacred moment. And if we can support and guide and educate all the caregivers and the family in this moment and how to do, what to do, we will create a sacred experience. And then that family will have a sacred memory that they will carry with them forever.
Mm.
And that's what our goal is. And we can reach that goal through education and providing the knowledge of end of life because it's different.
Yeah, so true. And Barbara, I've talked to you before about when my own mother died and I took care of her, and I had no idea she was going to die as quickly as she did when I came to care for her. But it ended up being just a few days before she died. She asked for custard, egg custard, which she had had when she was in the hospital the last time, a little cup of custard, and that's what she wanted. And I knew, on the one hand, as a hospice provider, she shouldn't be eating anything right now, but she really wanted it. And I also knew her mother used to make that at home, and it probably had all this emotional significance for her. So I drove right to the hospital, went into the cafeteria and said, "Can you give me one of those cups of custard that you have?" Because that was specifically the one she wanted. And I brought it home for her, and I put a tiny bit on her tongue, and that's all she wanted. That was enough. She wanted just the taste of that custard. It meant so much to her. I didn't understand it because I don't like the custard myself. I didn't understand it. I just knew something about that had significance. And so it told me there may be times when maybe the taste of something ha- could make a big difference. And if the patient asks for it and they seem to want it and they're open to it and it's important to them, I I hope it's okay. I assumed it was okay that I did that for her. I'm not sure she even really swallowed it, but
Oh, absolutely. If someone, your story is perfect because you gave her a gift of that remembrance of the flavor, and she's processing her life. And so that memory was one more piece of the puzzle that she's putting together. And if someone, I don't care if they're confused, which people will be as they get closer to death, if they're not making sense, and I put that in quotes, and say, oh, barbecued ribs, then you get barbecued ribs and you give them a taste because that, for some reason, is a piece of their puzzle that they're processing. And they're probably not going to eat all the ribs. They, like your mom, she didn't eat all the custard. It was just the taste.
mhm.
That's a gift we can give our special people.
And it does make sense because our senses, five senses kind of fade away gradually as we get closer to the end of life. And taste and scent are so powerful for us. So it makes sense that someone that may be that may be the key that unlocks a memory or helps them heal something or get in touch with something from the past. So that's why I like your idea of offer, don't ever force, but respond when your loved one, if they bring up something that's really important to them, then you make it available even if they never are able to eat it. Maybe they just want the smell of it in the
And,
room.
I can tell you many, many stories of dad said, you know, he wanted, well, let's use your mom, custard. So the caregiver makes, just like you went and found it, makes this special custard. And then when the person doesn't eat it, the caregiver feels bad. I did all this work so that you could have custard and you aren't eating it. And then there's tension. And that's why the knowledge of that this is normal, this is natural, this is going to happen, prepares the caregiver so that there aren't any guilt feelings or upset feelings.
Yeah, oh, so true. Because that's really the key during those last weeks of life. We're trying to create peace if we can around the patient. And so we want education to be there to help dispel any of that guilt or any misunderstandings that could come up.
Yeah, because as I said, we want to help create that sacred memory that people will carry forever.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because thinking in terms of as we remember our loved ones after they died, maybe the barbecued ribs become something that the family, at a time of remembrance, everyone eats barbecued ribs, or we eat the custard that mom wanted. Or my mom also, I'm sure I've told you this story before. She asked for onion rings. The last thing she said, the last words she spoke to me were, I want onion rings. And so, but she died a few hours later. But so, you can eat the onion rings. And it's actually kind of a sweet memory and a sweet way of thinking of her.
Well, and literally, we did that with barbecued ribs as a family because Jack loved them. And so, months after he had died and we were all together, we had ribs. And then we sat around the table and talked about Jack and Dad. And so that's another example of socializing over food, of remembering over food, of the importance of food on so many levels in all of our lives.
Mm, yes. Yes, exactly. And I think one of the things that I learned just from watching my mom during that last week was that she no longer felt about food in general the way she used to. And I think that's the one tricky thing when we're working with someone who's dying. We have to remember that they're becoming a different person now than they used to be through this process. So this may be a person who loved food, and you can't even imagine how they're going to get through a day without being able to eat their favorite food. But they may not care at all. They may not even think of it. It's not even on their minds as something that they want at that time. Their focus is elsewhere.
They're working on leaving their body, that's their job. And so they're letting go of their hold. And we have all kinds of different things that hold us here that we're attached to. And we're letting go of all of that, gradually letting go. And food's one of them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I just want to make sure people know the book is Always Offer, Never Force, Food at End of Life. And Barbara, tell people where they can get a hold of it.
You can go to my website, which is bkbooks.com. Um, and while you're there, you might want to sign up for my weekly blog that I write. You can do that at the website. Um, you can even call the office, and that is, oh dear, let's see. I don't know off the top of my head. Oh, geez.
I can put it in the show notes, Barbara. I'll
Okay.
I'll I'll type it in there so people can go to the show notes and it'll be in there if they want to
Hey,
look at it.
I can tell you my cell phone, but I can't tell the office number. Oh,
That's all
that's
right. Well, you probably don't ever call it
I don't.
because you live there basically. But um, uh, I would encourage if people go to your website to look at the whole bundle of the books that you've written, because there will probably be a lot of them that someone would like to have on hand. And if you're a death doula, if you work in hospice, you should have these books at your for your own use, but to help you learn how to educate the families that you work with and the caregivers. But they're a wonderful gift if you know someone who's caring for a loved one right now. Wow, what a fantastic gift to give them these books. Gone from My Sight, 11th Hour, Always Offer, Never Force, exactly the tools that anyone needs who's taking care of a loved one at home. And so, Barbara, are they on Amazon as well if people want to
Yes,
order
they
from
are. You
Amazon?
put in Barbara Karnes in Amazon or the title of any of the books. But really, if you just go to the website, it's easier. Um, and it costs you less.
Yes, that's a great tip. So, so I encourage everyone to have this book, even if you don't need it now. These are the books that you need on your shelf because there will be a day when you are experiencing an end of life process with a loved one and you need this information. And far better to have it in advance and be prepared than at the last minute be scrambling and trying to figure out, oh, what was that book again? Where do I get that? So I just encourage people to visit bkbooks.com and check out all of Barbara's books there. And Barbara, thank you for joining me today to talk about your new book.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Um, I really enjoy the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll see you the next time.
Okay.
Okay, bye. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Barbara Carnes. I'll be talking with Barbara again soon in another month or two. So stay tuned for that. And I'll be back soon with another interview for you. So until then, take care and be well. Bye bye.